Welcome to the Real Life Buyer podcast. In this podcast, you will hear interviews with business owners, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, authors, and technical specialists in their field. These professionals will hasten your development, accelerate your career, and broaden your business know-how. Now, introducing your host, Dave Barr, interviewing with a purchasing twist.
Hello, and welcome to the Real Life Buyer. I have a question for you. Would you like to learn and master brandfluence? Joining us is Shachar Meron, a branding savant with over 20 years' experience of shaping over 100 brands, a business owner, university lecturer, entrepreneur, published cartoonist, political consultant, and chess champion, to name but a few of his accolades. As a partner and creative strategist at Blue-Green Branding, Shachar empowers tech and finance leaders to craft outstanding brands. Today, I'd like to delve into rebranding's intricacies, the challenges and opportunities, and discover strategies to weave compelling brand narratives, especially in the fintech and communications realms. So without further ado, I welcome Shachar onto the podcast. Hi, Shachar.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us today. Branding is always an interesting subject. I've been in businesses where they have rebranded. You question what's the point sometimes with a change of color or a slight change in the font used in the lettering. So I sometimes wonder what's the benefit. So hopefully today you'll be able to share some of that with us.
Yeah, hope so.
Before we kind of dive in though, I'd like the audience to get to know you a little bit better. So if you could kind of cast your mind back and paint us a picture of the kind of key events that have either guided or perhaps driven you to become a leading branding and advertising expert. That'd be great.
Yeah, sure thing. So my background comes from the creative side. You mentioned in that brief bio a little bit of cartooning. So growing up, I wanted to create cartoons, which involves both art and writing. When I started college, I didn't know what I wanted and came upon advertising. I knew that I wanted to be creative in my profession, and I did not want to be a starving artist. So advertising kind of brought those worlds together of creativity, but also a business element where you can use that to, earn a salary for yourself and also drive some growth. And so coming off of that, I got my undergraduate in advertising and even stuck around my alma mater, University of Illinois, to get my master's in advertising. And there's a variety of reasons why people might want to stick around to get a master's. Mine, I had some good reasons and some not so good reasons, but it did open a lot of doors for me so that when I started my career in the ad world, I began as a creative, actually as a copywriter. But over the years, working at various agencies, I sort of tried a bunch of different things and found that I enjoyed swimming upstream into the strategy world, by which I mean getting involved earlier in the process, being in the room where it happens when people make big decisions about what's this brand going to be. I love the creative side of it as well, being a writer and later a creative director, but sometimes it felt like a lot of the big decisions were already made by the time I got involved. And through that work, I also, you mentioned, been a serial entrepreneur. I had done freelance and consulting work. I had started a different agency, a little creative boutique with a partner. And more started to get into a world of businesses that are starting up or businesses that exist and need some sort of a transformation. And the world of branding and rebranding really opened up to me. So, that's sort of the short version of it. I mean, since then, I've also gone on to actually teach at my alma mater as an advertising and brand professor. I've been doing that for the past 9+ years. And my current consultancy, Blue-Green Branding, is something I do in parallel to that to try to get that real world application and also, bring the learnings from the teaching side.
Brilliant. So it sounds like you only have a few hours sleep a day then.
That's right. I also have 4 kids. So sleep
goodness.
is not on the menu.
Oh, well, fine. I've got one and that's enough. Thank you. Brilliant. Okay. So we've established an incredible career to date, and obviously you're a very busy guy. Now, you've got a background, obviously, both in branding and teaching, which perhaps is quite unique. You've got perhaps an unusual vantage point to observe the evolving landscape of branding over the years. How have you seen the priorities and the challenges shift for companies in creating brands that resonate? I think that's the right word to use, resonate amidst this ever-increasing noise and turmoil that's going on around us. How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, there's more brand communications than ever before, both advertising and, unpaid. there's so much volume that it is the real challenge of companies. How do we stand out? And you don't want to do that by creating more noise. By the same token, you have people entering this profession. That's my vantage point as a teacher, not entirely sure what this profession looks like. It's less clear cut than it had been in the past. There used to be more, hey, here's 10 different roles. You're going to fit in one of these, or your clients are going to come to you with a budget and an ask. Now it's much more open-ended, which is both exciting, but also a little bit nerve-wracking. People that aren't sure how to navigate this sometimes feel uncomfortable. So a lot of it just comes down to, making sure people are strategic in the choices that they make. Because we live in a world of limited resources, you don't want to waste time and energy and money throwing it at an audience that doesn't care, or focusing on a message that is not something you can own. So a lot of my work as a brand strategist is helping clients figure out what their special sauce is, right? What's their sweet spot, the place that they can compete, the place that they can own in the mind of their customers. And once we've really honed what that message is, what's a way that we can bring that to life in an interesting way, so that it doesn't read like a PowerPoint slide, but rather has that emotional resonance that you just talked about with audiences. Then by the point that companies are actually, doing paid advertising or creating communications, they're not just throwing it out into the wind. It's very targeted, it's very focused, and hopefully it will make some sort of an impact. Then when it comes to, the students that eventually become the young professionals of the world, they need to do the same thing. In fact, a topic I talk about them a lot is personal branding, and the idea that you yourself are a brand. And when you apply for a job, you are one of 50 resumes they're going to see that day. So what is a way that you are going to stand out? What is that, special sauce that you bring to the table? How do you stack up against competitors? And how do we position you in the best possible way?
Yeah, I've certainly noticed a lot more talk about your profile on LinkedIn. That's something I've been focused on quite recently, how important it is to have the right photograph, how you describe yourself. Don't put yourself almost like on LinkedIn as a CV, as was always the case perhaps previously. So I kind of get things are changing quite a bit, and the sort of LinkedIn landscape, the expectations that, what people are looking for appears to be changing quite radically as well. So I've been quite fascinated by what's going on.
Yeah.
Now, what this says is that everything's changing at a very fast pace. Certainly business is changing. If we just look at what's going on in the world at the moment, it's incredible, the pace of change, the unexpected things that are happening. And so for brands to get the attention, I guess, that they'd always hoped for, perhaps is quite difficult. People's attention spans are very short now, changes all around us. So you mentioned a number of things in your last answer. And I'm curious, how do you go about guiding your clients to craft a compelling brand narrative, something that people will resonate with, or stand with them for perhaps some time, not just fractional seconds these days? So how do you capture them? How do you dig into the fact that, people want or would expect to see X, Y, or Z? I wouldn't know where to start with those sort of things. Can you give us some guidance on how you take your clients through that journey?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, it's not the same for every company. In fact, when it comes to your own brand narrative, I wrote a piece once about, do you start with yourself or do you start with your customer? There's different schools of thought. Who's the hero of the story? And, for most of history, most of, modern economic history where advertising was a major thing, the idea is you start with the customer. You have to research your target audience. You have to first separate out your target audience from the rest of your audience, understanding you can't be everything to everyone. This itself is sometimes a challenging concept for clients who think of target audience as limiting. They sometimes interpret it as like, well, I kind of would accept money from everyone. And we're like, no, we get that. The question is, who's that low-hanging fruit? Who's that more targeted audience that you want to pay special attention to, shape messages for them, allocate resources towards reaching them? And once you understand who those people are, not just their basic demographics like age or income, but those psychographics, the understanding of what makes them tick and their priorities in life, your job is to then intersect with them where they are in their life. Your job is to not change the way they feel about certain things. It's just too hard. It's too much of an uphill battle. Unless you are the industry leader in your particular market, it's just not worth it for that. So you learn what they care about, and then you take what you bring to the table and meet them where they are. Show them, listen, that pain point that you have, we have that solution that solves your problem. Or that thing that you really want, we have that thing that will make you happy. So you mentioned the word resonate earlier. We're trying to resonate by getting, their little hum to line up with our hum and make sure that it all syncs up. Now, that also involves an honest look at your own brand. And this is where for some companies, it may depend on if it's a new brand and we're talking to, say, the founder who had a vision one day, or an existing brand where we're trying to transform it so their brand can catch up to the realities of their business. But we look at the same types of things in both cases. We tend to look at things like their mission and values. Many companies have these, but many don't, or at least have not articulated them yet. So we help them uncover that. We make a point of you don't manufacture things like mission and values, you uncover them. Otherwise, it would come off as inauthentic. You also look at things like just the actual services and products that you offer. What are features and benefits that they do for people? Don't look past that. There are some who say, like Simon Sinek is one that I use as an example, start with why. I like to put a little asterisk on that and say sometimes you start with why, but sometimes you actually start with what you do, because in your market, that might be how people shop for you or think of you. So trying to really be honest about what you bring to the table in terms of your product and services that is strong or unique, that you stack up well against the competition. You should also be aware of where you are kind of par for the course and also where you have weaknesses. And when I say be honest, it's so that you can accurately decide, what am I going to focus on? Focus is probably in a nutshell what this brand strategy is all about. Again, that idea of there's so much noise out there and we have limited resources. So if you imagine you've got one best shot at connecting with somebody, let's get down to our strongest strength that connects with the biggest need that our audience have and see if we can make a connection there. However, there's, again, lots of different ways to do it. Some companies are entirely mission driven, and it's not about, the customer and their needs right now, but rather what we believe in. The hope is that ultimately all those pieces fit together.
Yeah, it's interesting some of the things you said there, because I've been doing a lot of networking with small to medium-sized enterprises. So the business owners, and you always ask the question, well, what are they there for? What's their purpose? Who are their target clients? And, perhaps some people will be surprised that many struggle with the answer to that. Who is my target client? And you mentioned the fear of alienating some customers by niching down. And that's something many of them, I would say 80% of those that I've interacted with recently, really do struggle with, and they are fearful of niching. Exactly as you said, I don't want to alienate a customer. I'll take anybody's money is quite important to them, particularly in the early years.
That's right. And sometimes there's pressure, like when you pick that one thing, that's all you are and you can never change it, which is not the case. For starters, it's not all that you are. When I deal with messaging, and this comes with my background as a writer, I tell people you can say everything you want, just not all at the same time. But what gets said first is disproportionately powerful. It's that headline that 9 times as many people read as the rest of the text. It's that first 5 seconds of a video before we, skip it as soon as we possibly can. It's that first impression. So it does matter quite a bit. And you don't want to change it every week if it's not working out. But the biggest mistake you can make is not choosing anything at all, because there's no guarantee you're going to pick the quote unquote right thing. But if you don't pick anything at all, kind of hedge your bets, list out, a tagline that has, 3 different words separated by periods, then you've made no choice at all. And then you've probably maximized your chance of failure. So best is to actually go take a swing at some point.
Okay, I like it. Yeah. Now, one of the things I noticed, there's a recent post you did, which caught my attention. And basically it was a single line, and it said, a good brand purpose has heart. A great purpose also has legs. Now, there was an article to go with that. I wonder if you could explain to the audience what you meant by that statement and how they could learn from that.
Yeah, for sure. This is the practical side of me. A purpose should have heart. We're talking about brand purpose, mission, things like that. And that part, I think people understand, right? It should have heart, meaning it should be authentic. It should really come from somewhere. Your company should actually back it up then with real action. It shouldn't just be that, poster that hangs on the wall when you walk in the building, or that one line on the website and then everyone ignores it. So in the best of cases, a brand, a company that have a strong purpose, you can actually see it infused in all areas of the business, even to help, drive business decisions or attract the right employees and reward them accordingly. The idea of it also having legs is, just basically the idea that it should be able to go somewhere. We should be able to do something with this. We should actually have some aspects creatively to bring it to life in an emotional way that gives us a little bit of flavor to stand out a little bit from others that are out there. Also, the idea that like there's something special enough about it that you can use this to help differentiate from other organizations. There's nothing saying that a brand purpose has to be the thing that you differentiate on. There's plenty that say, our brand purpose is to improve the lives of our customers or things like that. But is there something a little bit further that you can do with that can now work its way to inform things like marketing and communications on one end, or internal culture on hiring practices on the other end? So having legs just meaning, can it go further? Can we do more with this? I've many times, as a creative, been dealt a hand of like, well, here's the brand elements we have to work with. And there's just not that much there. It's like, I believe that this is true, but there's nothing here that's unique or original. And in those cases, I've been asked sometimes to bring the uniqueness with the creative, with the language and the visuals that we choose. And we can do that. But it's much better to have special creative built on special strategy than have the strategy come out somewhat generic. And now it's all up to creative to do something different. Again, the problem with that is that you end up with just surface level flash at best. And at worst, people actually dig below the surface and they find there's nothing there. And this company is not for real.
Okay, that is interesting. Now, we opened up the discussion, we mentioned rebranding. And we've all seen examples of rebranding out there. And I said, sometimes I don't quite get it. I wonder if you could share perhaps a real world scenario, and it could be a tech, finance company, communications, whatever you like, where they successfully managed what you perhaps call a complex rebranding process. Trying to understand what the strategies they've employed to navigate the risks of doing that, because I guess there could be some serious downsides. We all remember the chocolate bars that have changed names over the years, and people say, you mad? Everybody knows this is whatever. So how do they navigate those risks, but on the flip side, seize the opportunities?
Yeah, it goes back to something you mentioned at the beginning of this recording, which was brands have to, if they're going to undergo a rebrand, it has to be for the right reasons. That's right out the gate. The biggest stumble that people make is they are rebranding for the wrong reasons. Now, right and wrong, it's not always that clear cut, but I have over the years seen many reasons that could fit into one category or the other. A good example of a bad reason to rebrand is like, hey, our company has a new chief marketing officer and they kind of want to shake things up. Or even a new CEO. And it's just like, they want to put their fingerprint on this brand, regardless of if it's in trouble or not. We just wanted to, for their own selfish reasons, do that. It's a human instinct to want to make an impact on your organization. But that by itself is not a good reason. There's very good reasons for wanting to rebrand. If it's a matter of, our customers have changed. What they care about and what we do for them is no longer clicking. And we have more or different competitors in place than we've had before. Or even we've improved, but our brand doesn't reflect it. It's kind of behind. We're not causing problems, but we're missing opportunities. When you rebrand for the right reasons, and I'm oversimplifying it, but you look at all sorts of things, well, then right off the bat, you've way maximized your ability to make the most of this opportunity. Now, once you're actually in the process, it's funny because I use the word rebrand a lot. It's actually one of the things I do the most. But my most recent article has been about don't call it a rebrand. That word itself is fraught with peril. When people hear the word rebrand, they have certain assumptions with what that means. And I was actually talking with a few strategist friends of, so what constitutes a rebrand? And the three of us had three completely different answers. For one of them, they said, it's got to have at least a name change. And I was like, I did not expect that. A name change is in some very extreme examples part of a rebrand, but in my opinion, it's fairly rare. For someone else, it was more about, listen, the design doesn't have to be the main thing that changed. It should be connected to strategic things that changed. But if the design doesn't change, if there's not a new logo, it won't connect. People will not take it seriously that there's actually been a rebrand. And then there's the idea that is it surface level versus how deep does it go? Things like positioning, persona, all the different jargony terms. Well, at what point do you cross the line and say, this is a rebrand? Ultimately, there is no one line. But for the sake of argument, if you want to talk about brands that did not successfully rebrand, I think of consumer brands like, say, The Gap, for example. This was one of those very surface level fails where company rolls out a new logo. They are in a very image-driven industry, so logo does matter. The new logo is instantly shot down by the public so quickly that the company kind of is like, just kidding, and they go back on it. It's an embarrassing moment for them, but they can eventually move on with their lives and pretend like it never happened. And occasionally they make a punchline. That's a rare example. That's a rare case where a brand tries something, the public rejects it, and they move on. The far most common cases of brands that mismanaged a rebrand are the ones you never hear of. The ones that did it in the hopes of standing out in a crowded market, and it just didn't work. Nobody paid attention. Nobody noticed. They did not have any more success afterwards than before. The ones that did have success with it, this is where it's tricky because a lot of brands I work with, I can't really talk too much about the specifics of what we did. But, working with companies, a lot of, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, companies like, say, a software developer that had their roots in website development, but have long since moved past that. Web development now is not the same business that it was in the year 2000. And so companies that just do web development are not seen in the same way and don't get the same types of projects as the ones that say maybe do software development and are creating games and apps and things like that. So a company that we had worked with had long since moved past their web development days, but they were like, we need some help in getting people to understand that we're a software developer. We don't want these types of projects. We want these types of projects. We don't want these types of employees. We want those types of employees. And that sort of a rebrand doesn't necessarily come with a name change. In fact, in that case, it didn't even come with a logo change, but it did come with a lot of change in the culture of the organization, the way that they presented themselves to the market in their communications, and then ultimately the people they hire and the customers that they get.
Okay. You mentioned about, in some ways, for me, you mentioned about trust. Because I associate sometimes certain brands with when they come out with perhaps a new product or they've developed a product, you instinctively believe that it will be a good product. You trust that name, you trust that brand. Now, how do you establish and maintain trust in a brand per se? What sort of things do you have to do? What's the process? What's the execution that has to take place so people associate you with the trust element, so they always go back to you time and time again, irrespective of what you produce?
Yeah, trust is one of those root things that are essential to the world of brands. When I define what a brand is to my students, for example, there's so many definitions out there. And one of the most common ones I see out there is a promise. A brand is a promise of some sort of expectation of quality, experience, what have you. So a promise means that if I walk into McDonald's, I have a sense for what I'm going to get, what it's going to taste like, what it's going to cost, what the service will be like. And if I go to buy a car, I am doing a similar thing. I have all the different messages in my head and experiences that have accumulated over years, plus say reviews that I might read or test drives I might do to summarize, like, I trust that a car that comes from this car maker is going to deliver on X, Y, and Z. So trust is important regardless of whether you're consumer or business to business or small or big or whatever it might be. Now, how do you build trust? Trust has to be earned. It's never just given. Companies that now are trusted for quality or ethical behavior, they didn't just start that way. They had to actually just gradually build that over years and years. Also, trust can be lost much faster than it's earned. But the idea that trust should never just be communicated, trust should first be demonstrated by what you do and who you are. Then only once you've already been demonstrating for some time that this is what we're all about. And again, trust is a matter of, it could be about your character, like, can we trust you to do the right thing and behave ethically? It could also have to do with capability. Can we trust you to, deliver the fastest this like you said that you would, or you deliver the only that like you promised? So trust has to be baked in all those, but it first begins with actually delivering on that, sometimes for years. And then gradually you can now draw attention to that in your marketing, advertising, other communications type things. But if you communicate it before you actually demonstrate it, again, it's just going to backfire. You might convince a few people in the short term, but in the long term, it would only cause damage. And we've seen cases of brands that, try to tout something from the mountaintop, and then it turns out that there was nothing there. There's famous examples of that. I believe the BP oil spill happened right around the time that they had their Beyond Petroleum sustainability message. You don't want things like that to happen. But that takes a lot of discipline, by the way. There's a lot of companies that want to start by promoting, you can trust us to do this. And we always say, anybody who says, trust me, you should just run in the opposite direction. They should not be trusted.
Okay. There's a scenario where there's a risk. And what I mean by that is when brands decide to collaborate, they could be both trusted brands, but there's a reason for a collaboration. Now, if one of those parties, for whatever reason, has a problem, you just mentioned one just now, that can taint the relationship. So if brands are going to get together and collaborate and hopefully get impressive results, what has to happen to contribute to that success? What's the synergies that have to be aligned to make sure that any collaboration ends up benefiting both parties and the public, of course, in liking it?
That is a really timely question because brands have partnered up so many times in the past. But now with the emergence of things like social media influencers, the quantity of partnerships and the visibility of partnerships are so much bigger than they used to be. And a lot of brands, they like to partner with individuals or companies that already have some brand equity because it's sort of like borrowed attention. It's like, listen, if I'm partnered with this celebrity who's beloved for this and they're associated with us, then we can borrow some of that for ourselves. But like you said, it's also risky. And there are plenty of cases of a company getting into bed with a celebrity or another company who then misbehaves. And then now you're just trying to distance yourself, right? That's when the crisis management folks come in. I would say the best way to vet if the synergies are there is through things like mission and values. If you share the same mission and values and you can do some digging to see, do they actually demonstrate this over time as opposed to just say it? That's probably your single best chance to connect with somebody. In fact, at that point, it almost doesn't even matter if the nature of their business overlaps with yours. It can very often, we can find a way to help each other out if our mission and values align. There are other ways to align as well. It could be something like, I'm just making this up, but if your brand is known for being the fastest in its category, and you say, listen, this one person just won gold at the Olympics, they're the fastest human being on earth, let's partner up. There's plenty of times that makes sense. It's just, again, now you have to really vet them to make sure you understand what are the risks that we are taking on. What's really tricky is when it's not even an outside partner, but it's even like a CEO or the founder of your own company. There are some brands that have benefited from having a outspoken or larger than life CEO. They get more attention sometimes, or maybe more investment dollars as a result. But then sometimes that prominent CEO then shoots off their mouth at the wrong moment, and then now the question is, do we need to distance ourselves? So definitely, life is always set up with risk and reward. These are things where you can mitigate the risks quite a bit. I think that a lot of the times that there's been some misbehavior, people kind of saw it coming.
Okay. Some people thrive on the misbehavior and get a lot of following because of it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Quite amazing, particularly in politics, I notice these days, but there we go.
Yeah, politics and pop culture, which the line has been blurring between those for some time now.
Absolutely. Now, what's quite interesting is I'm sure that as a lecturer, you have some kind of curriculum to follow. So there's given ways of doing things, should we say, that have been tried and tested over a period of time. But on the converse side, we have things rapidly changing at the moment. A lot of the rule books are being rewritten. As you say, there's a lot more, I would say, a lot more creativity now than ever. So how do you, where you're trying to teach your students about the theory, the practice, and everything else that has been adopted over many years and decades, align that with the rapid changes that are going on today? Because what you could teach today could be quite different tomorrow. How do you cover that for your students?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in this field, I teach advertising and branding. If I taught in, say, chemistry or philosophy or history, I'd still see change in my field, but not quite to the same extent. So we are a field that thrives on change. However, universities are not always built to move quickly and adapt. But what's nice is the way, at least in our program, we have some flexibility to evolve our program over time. There's always a core set of courses. For example, one of the classes I teach is, I think, the second or third out of a series of 8 required classes. So it's early, and it's focused on brand and advertising and brand strategy. Most of what I teach is very fundamental things like we talked about here, the idea of understanding your target audience, being focused with a message, research methods, things like brand architecture or positioning. These are things that even as the world changes and the tools you have at your disposal change, the fundamentals are the same. I don't believe we're going to get to a place where you no longer have to understand your target audience. I certainly don't believe we're going to get to a place where you don't have to focus. In fact, focus is more important than ever. Then there's other aspects, though, that are changing quite a bit, and you'd be a fool not to roll with it. So a good example of this is I taught a copywriting class, an elective, for years. Right? I got my start as a copywriter. I share a lot of my industry examples and tips and things like that. But, in the past year, especially, we've seen AI really transform this industry. I know I have to transform my course, and I'm teaching a rebooted version of it in the spring that incorporates AI. And it's not an incorporation in terms of like, here, there's something in the syllabus about how now you can't use AI to cheat. All professors and all teachers are getting nervous about that all the time, right? Students find a way to cheat. This is one of those latest things that help you do it. That is not enough. That is not what this is about. This is not fighting change and protecting ourselves. This is about how do we use change that has happened anyway and make sure that our students are prepared for the future world. So in that regard, just to illustrate the change, I had in my first job as a copywriter, I had a boss that would tell me, give me 50 headlines by lunch. In the period of a morning, here's your creative brief. I want you to give me 50 headlines because this is how we're going to explore the process, making sure we're understanding the main message. We're trying a variety of things. She didn't expect brilliance in a couple of hours, but she wanted to kind of test my creative muscles and make sure I was getting the quantity and variety that I needed. It was me learning as a copywriter how to do this field. And I had that as my first assignment for my copywriting students for years. Give me 50 headlines by Sunday, right? Now they could give me 50 headlines in 10 minutes if that was the prompt, because I've done this. I use AI as a tool myself, which we can talk about that later if you like. But I can't use a prompt that now somebody can do this in 10 minutes and move on. So now I have to change this assignment. And the assignment may be something more like a multi-step process, which is give me 50 headlines. You can do this on your own, or you can use this tool. But if you use this tool called chat, you now have to also show me your work of what you prompted. And then you have to take it to a next step. We don't just use tools and the latest innovations to do our work faster. We have to do it to make our work better and to go further. Because as I tell students, if AI can do your homework, then AI can do your job once you graduate. And we all, as human beings, have to ask ourselves, what do we bring to the table?
Absolutely. Certainly AI, as you say, is fascinating. I was thinking as you were saying that, could AI, with all the knowledge it has about us as individuals, what we talk about, what we put on social media, when we go onto search engines and put lots of things in, it builds up an enormous amount of data on us as individuals. Do you ever see AI being able to therefore target us as being certain avatars given certain parameters, and it creates, shall we say, some kind of branding or posts or something that it knows would align with our personal beliefs, values, and interests?
Easily. It could be done right now. I mean, at this point, with the right prompts, it absolutely could be done right now. Yeah, I don't think, AI is just the next step, but I do feel like it's a pretty big quantum leap in what we've seen before. But we have been feeding the internet all of our content for such a long time. And even off of the internet, we've been giving away our data for the longest time. So at this point, we should assume that any company knows just about everything about us, including where we are right now and what we just had for lunch. So yes, absolutely, it could be used to create that. I never want to say never. The question is just, when will it get to a level of sophistication that we think it could rival what human beings do? Probably not that long from now. I never want to say never to these things because we've seen too many times over the past how many years that we said technology will never be able to do that. And then it did it. I'm somebody who enjoys playing chess. And I remember in the 90s, people talking about Deep Blue. Like, in no way could a computer ever match a human being with chess playing. It's just, there's too much of an art to it. And it was a real blow, I think, to a number of people in humanity when that happened. And, little did we know, that was one of the first easier dominoes to topple. Now we're getting into things that, like, can we create emotional connections? I do believe we can. At the moment, I believe human beings are the best to usher that process through, to vet it, to add something. But I believe that AI can already get us 80% of the way there.
Yeah. I think that also the advent of digital currency, there's a lot of talk about it in the UK, that cash is going to die. Everybody will be using digital, and therefore how we spend our money will be dictated, or could be dictated, by other people or other entities, shall we say. And of course, every time you spend something on your credit card or whatever the currency is, it knows instantly what you purchased, where you purchased it, when you purchased it. So even more information about you as an individual suddenly becomes available at a huge, much greater depth than even it is today. And, that can be quite scary. It's funny, my wife and I were only chatting last night. We're talking about holidays. And my wife jumped onto her phone and she only put in 2 letters and it came up with the country that we were thinking about going to. Now that's quite scary, that's definitely eavesdropping there. But there we go. So, there's so much information available. Now, but before I jump on to the last question, and it comes back to something I touched on earlier on about new startups. Where can people find out more about your company, yourself, the things that you teach?
Yeah, so my consultancy is called Blue Green Branding. So if you go to bluegreenbranding.com, we have insights and resources on there that are basically, this is the educator in us coming out, just free resources and information for people that are interested in these topics of branding and or doing it themselves. In fact, this goes to, like, myself and my partner. We have our roots working with a lot of small businesses and startups. And these days we've moved generally the larger ones, but we still feel like we have a lot of things we can give people that they can then do it themselves. So if you are in a field where you've got a startup and you want to have templates for things like target audience research, brand strategy, things like that, we have resources there for that you can just use. We like to think if you can do this on your own without hiring us, then more power to you. And then if somebody tries it on their own and they're like, this, I need a little bit more, that's where we consult or we direct them to another way. But yeah, that's probably the main place right now to find my latest writings and resources.
Brilliant. Well, I'm going to be sharing that out because, as I mentioned earlier on, I'm talking or have been talking to quite a lot of fairly new businesses, perhaps within a year of their entry into the market. And I see a common concern, worry, a thread that comes through. So on their behalf, really, so from your journey as an entrepreneur, you've been a business owner, you're a branding expert. What advice would you give to someone who's recently started up in their first year or two of business? They're looking to build some kind of strong brand foundation. What could you suggest they could do to make sure that their growth is supported, their goals are achieved? How do they go about making sure their brand comes across in the right way and obviously builds over time?
Yeah, I feel like so many of the answers come from, a lot of them come from a business plan that's well put together. Now, I've worked with dozens of startup businesses over the years, and very few of them have a business plan that many people would say you must have, right? The reality is that sometimes people, they have an opportunity and a capability and they just run with it. But a lot of those things around how do you make your money? Who is your audience? How do you, what are the services that you offer? And then also just an understanding of your overall competitive landscape and the trends of it. This is the type of information that can really help you out. Most of the time, I should say this, all of the time that I do strategy, it's founded in research. And most of the time it's founded in the same 3 items of research: target audience research, knowing your customers or employees, brand research, meaning understanding your own company and what you do for people, and then competitive and market landscape, understanding the broader context of where you are. Between those 3 things, there's tools out there that help you triangulate and figure out what do I say in what order. Normally at that point, it's just about discipline and focus. It's very often the hardest thing is like we talked about earlier. A lot of people can do a SWOT analysis and get down to a top 5 strengths. Do you have the courage to narrow it down to 1 or 2 and build messaging and a brand identity around that? That is often where people fall short. So step 1, get together the kind of information that's normally found in a business plan. And if your business has changed since you started it, then absolutely update that. There are many, many times that a startup, starts thinking they're going to be one thing and then they become something else. But then if you have all that, then 2, start to make some choices. A lot of it comes down to you don't want to do too much guesswork. So a lot of it comes back to research. Do you have a brain trust? Do you have a couple of people that either can speak for your target audience or understand different aspects of your business that can weigh in on it? But making the decisions, what is our positioning statement in a single sentence? Ideally, then things like your brand name and logo and identity are built around what's that one thing that we stand for. Those are the hardest steps in branding. Once you're on the other side of that, honestly, I feel like that's the fun and exciting part. Now that we've decided to go all in on this is the way that it can manifest.
Brilliant. Would you say that when they project themselves to their audience, they must be obviously consistent in a number of different ways, consistent in the imagery, consistent in the tone of their, of what they're trying to convey, the colorations that they put out, there's consistency there. They have to, people talk about the amount of posting that you do on different social medias. They have to make sure that they're consistent on how they project themselves and when they project themselves and how frequently they project themselves. Are all those things equally important or less so?
Absolutely. I have an article called Consistency Isn't Sexy, but It Sells. So many clients that I've been brought in with have started with a cleanup. The business has been humming along, and in the past 10 years, there have been some acquisitions. They've pivoted to some new geographic markets. They have different offerings, and now the brand is a mess. That causes real damage. It creates an impression of it creates confusion with your audience. It creates the impression of a kind of a sloppy brand that doesn't think things through, maybe subconsciously. I mean, sometimes people roll their eyes. They say, listen, I'm into business to business, mainframe, et cetera. What do they care if I use this shade of blue on my website and that shade of blue, on my social media? It does have an impact. And especially on the messaging side, you lose your impact of messaging if you're all over the place. I sometimes compare messaging to like being like a laser. A single beam of light, not going to do much. If you can get 100 beams of light all aimed at the same spot, you can burn through steel. So that consistency is so important. And then they know wherever they see you, visit you, hear from you, they're getting that over and over. Then it starts to sink in. Then they can start to form that impression they have of you. Then when you back it up with, say, the products and services you offer, that's where that trust comes in. Sometimes this comes in the form of this consistency comes from brand guidelines. More established brands often have a document that you can look to that have not just the mission, vision, values type stuff, but then gets into here's how we use our logo and colors and graphics and writing. It's a good idea to have those in whatever form. I've seen the 1-page and 2-page versions of them just to get started. But then it's a good idea to regularly look through things, make sure that we're being consistent. Hey, we just had that acquisition, and this team that we have that's, over in the UK are doing their own thing because they like their old brand color better. And then this team in Mexico is having this kind of a message. Sometimes you really do have to play the brand cop and bring it back in. You want to give people the flexibility to do what they need to do. I mean, this can get into a whole thing about good brand guidelines, have some flexibility built into them so that people don't just feel constantly constrained by them. But most importantly, teaching your people the why. Why do we have these brand elements? Why do we do this consistently? Because it makes all of our jobs better and it's going to make the company more successful.
Brilliant. That's a great way to note, to finish on. I think that's going to be quite helpful for the people I've been talking to. I'm certainly going to be pointing them to this podcast to hopefully sharpen up their branding and imagery. So I'd like to thank you very much for your time today. It's been most fascinating, and obviously wish you all success with your branding going forwards.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And to everyone listening, happy to connect with you on LinkedIn as well. It's one of the channels I use the most. So happy to talk there.
Thanks, then.
Yeah, take care.
So there's another Real Life Buyer podcast. I do hope you enjoyed it, and it has given you some ideas and inspiration for greater action and achievement. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes, and a 5-star review would be most appreciated. If you would like to discover more about me and what I do, take a look at www.thereallifebuyer.co.uk. Bye.